Hosted by you/peasant choker. People who knew murderers, when did you know something was off? The murderer I know was more of an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me and we hung out sometimes, but not like just the two of us. Still, we'd chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and kept moving. I remember thinking maybe we don't know each other as well as I thought. Later he was playing Nintendo, yep, my N64, this was a while ago, with my roommate when I came home. He apologized and said his mind was elsewhere. A couple days later there are cops all over the building, interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate with a bullet in the back of his head in an abandoned lot across town. The next day he confessed. I never suspected a thing. She was the nicest woman. I even let her babysit my cousin when I had custody of him for a little while. She was my neighbor, couple houses down, and everyone loved her. She grew gigantic pumpkins, was always outside, so everyone interacted with her a lot. I moved away and a few years later and was shocked to hear everything from my family and friends who still loved in the area. The story: she was married to a man, I knew him from my time living there too. One day, he was just gone. She was all beaten up. She said he beat her up. We always suspected this happened before this incident, and had left her because he got a woman pregnant a few towns over. We never heard from him again, but didn't really have a reason to. She would mention every once in a while that he was still harassing her and was even beat up on another occasion after his disappearance. He was self-employed and didn't really have any family. No one suspected anything. 3 years later she was dating another man. While dating this man, the police had been investigating her for stealing money from the grocery store she worked at. They went to the boyfriend's cabin, where they both were, to arrest her. She came to the door, said okay, let me go put on some clothes. The police waited at the door. I obviously wasn't here for this part, so this is what I hear. The police then hear 2 gunshots. They run inside and she had poured gasoline and set the house on fire, then shot her dog then herself. It took some time to get the house fire under control. Once they did, and began investigating, they found another body in the basement that didn't die in the fire, but several days earlier. The body in the basement was her boyfriend. Then, they began investigating further, and found a blue 55-gallon drum in her backyard that contained her husband. So, she killed 2 people and her dog, and all she was suspected of was stealing from the grocery store. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold, and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had hit the girl before. Turns out controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard and she asked what he was doing and he replied, digging your grave. He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he stabbed her to death, threw her in a river and killed himself. I met the girl only a few times and him only the once, but the face that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school, more middle school. He was your typical redneck kid but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural South. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with, he was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated in the same town we all grew up and he killed his entire family. Mother, brother, stepsister, father. Just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride ATVs with his friend later that day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment, at least he said. It was weird seeing this kid who was to your knowledge just dumber than a bag of hammers yet odd innocence to him, on trail for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time. Almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something, sadness perhaps. When he said there was a teenager, his mother and his stepfather lived around the corner from me. My mother knew them better than myself, but we all thought they were lovely. A couple of years ago the son went to the hospital several times asking for help. He claimed he had voices telling him to kill his stepfather. But each time he went he was released and told to come back, they would give an appointment. A few weeks later during a small argument he stabbed his stepfather to death in the front garden. He turned himself in the next day, and wasn't convicted as he sought help before it happened. Instead, he got the treatment he needed. Not my experience, but my grandmother's. She got pregnant at 15 by my grandfather and had to get married, 1960s. He was extremely abusive and my grandmother went to the police multiple times because she felt like he would wind up killing someone, but they just didn't take it seriously and ignored her. He later went on to strangle and beat a 14-year-old girl to death with a baseball bat just a couple years later. I just realized that I have two scenarios that are similar enough to mention. 1. I went to the same high school as the chick who gained infamy in the US for convincing her boyfriend to kill himself and then running all these charity events for him before getting caught. The text messages were public record and absolutely chilling. I think she ended up getting off with manslaughter, but the case is being appealed and will likely go to the Supreme Court. She was extremely forgettable in high school, nothing remarkable whatsoever. 2. While I was in college I worked in the bookstore over the summers. I worked with a guy there who was a decent guy but always a little weird. He'd make inappropriate comments about some of the students that would come in for books etc. but seemed harmless. He ended up being charged for attempted murder after stabbing his wife multiple times. I believe an affair was involved. The only reason the poor women lived was because a construction worker saw the attack and intervened, so shout out to that guy for having balls of steel. I've worked with 3 murderers in my job role supporting people with disabilities. All 3 had varying degrees of learning disabilities, and honestly, only for one of them did I know something was up. He worked out a plea deal as his disability meant that he appeared to lack mens rea and fitness to plead. It was as I was taking him home after all of the investigation was over, he turned to me and said, "Don't tell my wife about this." It was at that exact moment I knew he knew what he'd done. The other 2 incidents, one was so traumatized by what she'd done, that she never recovered. She'd been in prison for 25 years and was broken when she came out. The last was a couple, another vulnerable adult had gone missing. They even helped with the search teams. They were in bits, really concerned for the welfare of their friend, went on TV for an appeal for her to come home. She was under their bed the whole time. It probably doesn't actually count, but I want to tell someone about this anyway. We, partner and I, had some neighbors move in across the street, a young couple in their 30s. The guy would come over almost every day to chat with my partner. My partner told me he would say things about being raped by his brother as a kid and that people didn't care about him. His wife was weird. She just sat on the porch not talking to anyone or doing anything. Just sitting there. All I knew about her was she didn't have custody of her kids. A few months ago, our street was filled with cop cars and ambulances. Being the nosy cunts we are, we just watched out the window for hours as cops busted down the door, fucked with the couple's lawnmower, and eventually we watched as 2 body bags were loaded up into a vehicle right in front of our house. Turned out they'd killed themselves, or I guess one killed both of them with consent. They turned the lawnmower on in their house and died from the fumes. Their dog died, too. My partner and I felt so bad for them because the landlord dumped their stuff into the street the day after and only one person came by grieving. We also felt angry at them for killing their dog. I tried finding the obituaries but couldn't. Months after this happened, I was on Reddit and saw a video, unrelated, of a man beating the shit out of a registered sex offender who was talking to his daughter. I went to Family Watchdog just to see, and guess whose mugshot came up? It was her. The wife. And she had a different last name than I thought she did, so I googled her name to see if she got an obituary. She did. There was also a news article about how she and her ex-husband raped all 3 of their own kids and only spent 4 years in jail. The man who did it with her is still out there somewhere. I knew she was weird, but damn. We didn't feel as bad for them anymore. So yeah, that was an emotional roller coaster. Sat next to him in choir class. He was always kind of off. He operated on his own wavelength. Constantly in his own world, never really engaging with anybody. People just didn't really exist on his radar. On a class trip we slept in the same hotel room and he walked around naked like I wasn't even there. I always assumed he was autistic, but in hindsight it might have been something much worse, like schizophrenia. He never seemed violent, but nobody ever talked to him enough to ever make that conclusion in the first place. A few months ago he beat and stabbed his mother to death with a kitchen knife. It was so bad dental records were needed to identify the body. He cut off one of her breasts and implied in his confession that he ate part of it. He waited until his dad came home from work to show him what he'd done, claimed he saw a sign from the devil that told him to kill her. That may have been a lie. From what I heard, he was very excited to tell the police what he had done. And from what I do know about him, he might have said it for the attention. He turned himself in, waived his Miranda rights, and confessed to everything. When the cops found him, he was literally soaked in blood. He refused to shower it off, so they had to hose him down before they put him in a cell. He's looking at 40 years in prison. His mom was an amazing woman. She tailored our suits for choir and was constantly volunteering. If there was an event, she was there. She was going to be her town's councilwoman next year. She loved her son very much. She didn't deserve to die like that. Obligatory didn't know him as a friend, but a regular customer in my shop. He would come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion he caught and helped us to evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local girl went missing and was eventually pulled out of a river a few weeks later. They announced they were looking for somebody in connection with her death, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying beer in a shop, still unconfirmed to this day being our shop, as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, as we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel as it was a rolling story local to us, we started to discuss the guy, if we saw him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl, who had previously said to management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there was too many creepy men around, told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her uncomfortable enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the murder, as he was found dead in a local park a few days later. He'd hung himself. I went through primary and high school with a guy in the year below me who seemed a little distant. We lived near each other and caught the bus from the same stop. He was a bit of a bully, but it was something more. Like, you could tell he wasn't a bully because he was hurting inside or because he felt threatened in some way. He was a bully because he did what he wanted to do and didn't realize that it hurt other people. Like the kind of kid who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Not long after I left my hometown, I heard that he had been charged with the murder of a 2-year-old. Apparently his girlfriend at the time left her daughter with him for an hour or so while she ran an errand. He couldn't deal with the toddler crying anymore, so he beat her. He caused severe internal bleeding and she died in hospital not long after. He would have been around 22 when he did it. He was sentenced to 36 years with a non-parole period of 27 years. My uncle murdered somebody and is currently serving life in prison. From my earliest memory, I knew he had some screws loose. He caught his wife at her lover's house, so he shot the guy. He was going to shoot her too, but she convinced him she wouldn't tell anyone. He burned the guy's house down in an attempt to cover his tracks. As soon as his wife could get free of him, she immediately reported him. As far as me saying I always got creep vibes from him, he always reminded me of a poor man's Charles Manson. I know one and still keep in contact with him. We all knew he had issues with rage, but we never thought he would have killed someone. We worked together at this restaurant for a while and we got really close. Like, if I wasn't in a committed relationship at the time, I would have dated him. He was super chill, down to earth, and the sweetest person, until something triggered him. He didn't get angry often, but he had triggers that would send him into a rage. He was horribly abused as a child by his father, so there was a lot of resentment towards men that looked like his dad or talked down to him. That is where we bonded, because I was abused by my mother. Thankfully, I had the resources to manage my trauma. Unfortunately, he did not. His parents believed that God was going to cure his traumas. It got to the point where his mother left, because his father would pull him out of therapy as soon as they would start making progress, and she couldn't deal with it anymore. He ended up suffering from a concussion about 6 months after I met him. He was helping a friend move and had a dresser fall on his head. After this, he wasn't the same. He quit coming into work and went almost radio silent. We would still talk, but we weren't as close as we were before. At the time, I was moving into the city and he lived in the suburbs, so we had planned on getting together to catch up. A week later, I got a call from my friend at 7 in the morning saying that he was in jail for hiding a body. I was shook. After an investigation, they interrogated him and he confessed pretty quick. He beat his dad to death with a barbell and tried to hide the body in the house. Afterwards, he ended up trying to kill himself but was unsuccessful, so he just left the house. After he was booked, I sent him a letter to check in on him. He had suffered from a psychotic episode and only remembers moments from the act. He's now serving 40 years with the possibility of parole after 20. He's medicated and doing really well. Last I checked, he had a few activities he was responsible for managing and he was working through his traumas with a psych. TLDR, I'm friends with someone who killed his dad during a psychotic episode. His dad abused him while he was a child, believed God would cure his mental illness, and would consistently pull him out of treatment/therapy because he thought it was against God's will. Not sure if this fits here, but it's a sad story nonetheless. About 4 to 5 years ago, my mom hired this man to remodel her kitchen because he had been recommended to her by a bunch of people. The day he shows up, he has his 11-year-old daughter with him to help out. The second I see the both of them, I think he's molesting her. Don't know why, have zero proof of it, just a weird feeling, and his vibe totally creeped me out. Maybe because she was so young. He mentioned having another girl and a son, and she should have been in school. He brought her over every day for 2 weeks while he did the kitchen. She was seemingly happy and fine, so I just sort of kept that in the back of my mind. Every day I would ask my mom when he'd be done so he could get the hell out of her house because he was so creepy and I didn't want him around us. My mom ignored it and told me she didn't understand, because he did good work and was really nice. Cut to about a year later and my mom calls me and goes, "Hey, remember Andrew, the guy who did my kitchen?" I said, "Yeah, why? Did he get caught molesting his daughter?" She goes, "How did you know that?" Turns out he had been brutally torturing his entire family, not only molesting his children, but did stuff like tie his son to a shed outside and make him eat his own feces, all in the name of Christ. They fled from him in the middle of the night and he's now in prison for the rest of his life. Honestly? I didn't. Son of a wealthy family. We were really good friends growing up. He would invite us all over to his awesome game room to play Warhammer, and would use his massive allowance to buy us Warhammer boxes, just so he could have more people to play with. He ended up getting his own house right after high school, and we all hung out there for movie and video game nights, and gladly shared spare bedrooms he let us crash in when we needed a place to get away for a while. He's now serving 300+ years for 4 counts of rape and a murder. Apparently he killed a girl during a bout of extreme breath play, and when she passed out, he, prioritized his own needs before her need to get an ambulance. We had absolutely no idea he was capable of doing such a thing. Really shook me up, just knowing I hung out with him so much and he bought me so much great stuff that defined my high school years. I still have the Warhammer figures in a closet. I'm tempted to throw them out sometimes, just to fully remove him from my life. But at the same time, I remember these figures brought a ton of great memories with my other friends, who have killed less people than he did combined, and when I look at them, those great memories are the ones that come to mind. I see the endless summer afternoons of us all painting figures and tearing up the tabletop together. I don't see the guy who bought me the box they came in.